We're going to get things started here shortly, so find your seats. Well, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our panel this afternoon, our first panel of the afternoon. We're going to be talking about pair programming, like a boss, evidently. And so with us we have Joe Moore from Pivotal, Pam Selle from Comcast. No? Not anymore. Okay. She can tell us more about that. And Olivia Haas, sorry. Olivia Haas from DuckDuckGo. And I'm Jason Garber, one of the co-founders here at PromptWorks. We do a lot of pair programming here at PromptWorks as well, so hopefully we can have a nice conversation about pairing. So let's start. Whoever wants to grab the mic first, and let's talk, briefly describe the digital products your company produces, your role at the company, and maybe a few of your responsibilities. Why don't we start with Pam, since she is the most interesting update. Yeah.
So I'm Pam. I'm an independent consultant working on web and mobile applications, so I help clients do that, I suppose, is what I'm doing now very recently.
Hi, my name is Olivia. I'm a software engineer at DuckDuckGo. Previously, I was at Punk Ave here in Philadelphia. DuckDuckGo is a search engine, private search engine, so we don't store any user data or information. What I do there is work with our open source project. So part of the search engine is open source. It allows people to kind of hack on the search engine. And so what I do is I build tools for open source developers to help their process.
Wow.
My name's Joe. I work for Pivotal. Pivotal has a bunch of different divisions. I work for Pivotal Labs, which is the Agile consulting practice. We also have a thing called Cloud Foundry, which is a platform as a service. And we also have a suite of big data products and consultants. You might have heard of Greenplum, or I guess Greenplum is kind of one of the big ones. We also have sort of under our umbrella a lot of things you might have heard of, like Spring and Spring Boot, RabbitMQ, and the like.
Great.
And I work remotely from Philadelphia.
So what has your experience with pair programming been?
My experience with pair programming has been great. It's been for a really long time. I've really been pair programming almost full time since 2000. And at Pivotal Labs, and then also it's beginning to spread it to the other organizations as well inside of Pivotal. We do 100% pair programming 40 hours a week on pretty much everything. So there's almost nothing that we don't pair on. My personal experience is that I like it for a whole bunch of different reasons. Everything from it's a continuous code review. It helps me learn about my coworkers. It helps us design better products. It helps us enable ourselves and our clients. And so there's many different reasons why I like pair programming, and I truly believe in it.
So my experience with pair programming is kind of two-part. At Punk Avenue, I learned web development as an apprentice. So during my apprenticeship, I spent a lot of time pairing with more experienced developers. That was really good for a lot of reasons, and that pairing was kind of anything from, how do you troubleshoot, like searching for programming answers, because when you're first starting out, you don't even really know how to do that, up to going through MongoDB courses together. Now at DuckDuckGo, we're an entirely remote company, so pair programming is more ad hoc, and it works a little bit differently because you can't be side by side with someone. So that's a bit different. Basically, video chat and one person on their development machine. Someone else might SSH into their machine if you want to actually work on the same document.
So I am, in general, a very big fan of pairing. I don't think we don't have no one representing pairing, don't do it, on the panel. But I definitely am looking forward to when you have questions if you've had challenges with pairing and what challenges you've encountered. But so my experience with pairing, especially on the team that I was recently on, we actually had a policy that any given story that you were working on, it had to have at least more than one person on it. So literally everything, and you could do that multiple ways, but usually it was through pairing it was the easiest way we found on a small team especially on a team of only 4 or 5 people, to make sure that everyone was very aware of pretty much everything going on. So they even had some glancing familiarity with it. And that when someone deeply knows a topic, that they can share that knowledge with someone else in a way that, everyone's still being really productive. And then I also I enjoy pairing with people in the open source community. So I'm also happy to talk about that and how pairing can help you get into open source.
So there's always this question, how do you go to the bathroom when you're pair programming? Joe gets asked this a lot. And how do you always respond to that, Joe?
Whenever you need to go, just go. Well, get up and go to the bathroom. But I do have a story about when I was pairing with somebody remotely, and I think there is a different aspect. This kind of gets into when do you take breaks and things like that. And I think there's especially an aspect with remote pair programming where, as you described, you usually have video and usually a headset on, and there is something about it that sort of, I feel, sort of creates this locked in, super laser focused thing that you're doing. And I was pairing with a guy over video and such, and he seemed to be getting either frustrated or fidgety, and I couldn't really figure out why. And I finally asked him, why is everything okay? And he finally said, I really have to pee. And I was like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that was a thing we weren't doing. So let's go ahead and do that. But it's it brings to mind, oh, these are things that you might not think about until they come up.
Yeah, I've definitely had the experience of having to set intentional breaks throughout a pairing kind of process, where it's okay, we're going to do this for an hour, and if that'll be the progress we make, or if we get stuck, let's leave it and then come back to it, because it's not just you kind of banging your head against something, it's both of you banging your head against something, which can be twice as frustrating or half as frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely would double down on what you said I like creating time buckets kind of things. Also that I'm interested that you notice visually in the video, Joe, because one of the things I was thinking was, you really, part of pairing is having to use your empathy muscle and paying attention to how the other person feels, and if they feel uncomfortable, if they feel heard, if they feel they're participating, and also if they just look tired or messed up or something, they look like they need to go to the bathroom, and just saying hey, do we want to take a break? Because you also can have social burnout too. And also I just wanted to mention, just in case you ever heard the term or you meet someone who says it, but it's kind of self-explanatory, but if you feel awkward saying I need to go to the bathroom, people say bio break, and say let's take a bio break, which also is nice and vague, and also refers to refilling your water or whatever you need to do, and so that's another way to engage in that.
So what are some of the benefits you've experienced from pair programming? There are many. Yeah, sorry, did you?
I did, yeah. I wanted to say the thing you said about empathy is really important, and also having been in the position of being the less experienced person in a pairing situation, learning to kind of advocate for yourself is really, really hard. And to say can you slow down a minute, or can you let me drive? Asking when you're younger, or if you're working with someone who's younger, even though less experienced, yeah, sorry, it would be better, it would be a good idea to offer and make sure that they feel comfortable in what they're doing, and at any time throughout the pairing process.
So, what are some of the benefits you've experienced from pair programming? Sorry to jump the gun. Go first.
So some of the benefits I have experienced from pair programming are learning a ton of great stuff, more than I would have learned on my own. One of the benefits is having someone right there to ask questions to, rather than having to walk across the room or ping someone on whatever chat application you have, worrying about taking up someone else's time. You already have their time. So that's one great benefit. Another great benefit is having someone else's brain augmented to your brain, kind of like a Star Trek mind meld, something like that. I don't know. Do you have any other specifics?
I definitely, well, it reminded me of, if you don't follow her blog, I would really recommend Julia Evans' blog. She's amazing and super excited about programming and everything. And one of the things that she said recently is that she feels like so many people have all this like knowledge in their heads, and especially like this terrible thing happens when you have a bunch of knowledge in your head where you think that like surely everyone else has it, and they don't. And one of the great things about pairing is that you get some of that, like almost like latent knowledge. Like that's the stuff I'm actually really excited by. Like when someone's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of when I was working on my PhD in whatever, in like epidemiology. And I'm like, what, who? And that's always really fun and interesting and keeps things really lively. And in terms of like, I'm sure you all have lots of experience with this in remote teams of like, like how do you get to know people when you don't have like the water cooler conversation? And pairing like has so many other benefits, but the social benefit is definitely really big.
Yeah.
I agree with everything that you said, and I think there's certainly a lot of personal benefits that I get, and that myself and my pair we get as developers sitting there programming. But I think the question that gets brought up a lot as well is like, well, why is this a good thing for the business? Why is this a good thing for our product? Why is this a good thing for our team at large? Isn't 1 + 1 = 2, so everything is just twice as expensive or twice as slow or twice as whatever? So some of the benefits on that front are fewer bugs. So like when you have two minds working on the same problem, you're going to catch more things. And especially if you have a team that's more than just 2 people, say 4 people, 6 people, 8 people, and you rotate pairs on a regular basis, which is a topic in and of itself, then you have more eyes on the system, more eyes, verifying that things are designed properly, coded properly, don't have silly mistakes or egregious design patterns that are emerging that are an anti-pattern that somebody on that project three projects ago ran into. And you wouldn't even, and if you weren't pairing with them, you wouldn't even know that this was an anti-pattern and those kind of things. So I think a lot of projects, a lot of people think about the fingers on the keyboards. It's like, oh, well, when does a project start? Well, it's when you do this on a keyboard. And when is it done? Well, it's when you take your fingers off the keyboard. Well, that's almost never the case. There's all that stuff leads up to that point, and then there's rework, bug cycles, refactorings, all these kind of things. And if the actual pairing is seen as an extra cost because 2 people are working on the same thing rather than on separate things, then where does the savings, where's the benefit come from? And it comes in part, just part of it is the reduced bug cycles, the reduced rework cycles, the better design code that when product comes and says, actually we got this wrong, we need to totally shift this thing to do something different, then something that has been designed as a group with 8 people all saying this seems like a pretty solid factoring, then it can be changed without having to scrap it all and redo it. So those are some of the non-personal benefits to pairing.
You mentioned better design, and I like the term highest common denominator in referring to that when 2 people are thinking about the same problem, the design tends to be the better of their 2 ideas, or maybe even a synergy that's better than either of them could have come up with independently. So better design, you mentioned fewer silos,
Well, and I mean, what you're talking about, Jason, it almost sounds like, I think a good thing to remember is that you said like Joe was saying about how like you have code review, but it's also that you were essentially rubber ducking the whole time, which is that concept of you be like, sometimes to solve the problem, you just try and explain it to like, it doesn't even have to be a person. But like you're constantly explaining your solution, and with that, it becomes evident like unnecessary complexity and things like that. Like when you say it out loud, like to another person, in a pair, and they say like, maybe not, maybe not that. That's so helpful. And it's a team member. It's, it's not, like down the line after the QA team has ripped something apart or something. It's in a safe environment, which I think is really important.
And early.
Yeah, early, and which is earlier is cheaper.
Yep. From the perspective of running an agile consulting shop, there's kind of that cross-training aspect, but it's not just seniors teaching less senior members or ramping them up or something like that. It's also just people coming from different disciplines, people coming from different parts of the code base or with different experience in a big app, being able to teach each other. And it also helps us, maybe as project managers or whatever, be able to cycle people through the projects as well. If there's been some pairing, it's much easier to add a new person to the team, grow the team, that kind of thing as well. And as someone who's done a fair bit of pair programming, I find that initially it's very exhausting because you're spending so much time on task. You're not taking kind of mental breaks as much. You need to be careful about taking breaks, of course, but because you have another person, you're just really actively engaged the whole time.
I mean, social sunburn is a thing for me too. Like,
say more about that.
Social sunburn.
No, what's that?
When you like, say you come to an event today, and like some of you, this might ring true. You're gonna, like, some of you will go home tonight and you will like eat dinner and not talk to anyone, because that's what you need to do, because you've been highly engaged with other people. And I say that even as like, it's one of those things where people sometimes want to do the extrovert introvert delineation. I say this as a very extroverted person, is that it takes energy from me, almost especially if the other person isn't giving me energy back. Like if we're all excited, then like I cheered on Broad Street on Sunday, and I was like, can we all meet up and just like yell positive things, because it feels awesome. Like when you get energy from other people, it feels really good. And so like I think that's like definitely like, why do you get tired? And that's why it's, when we say like bio breaks, is also like, I'm also very open with people of like, if you don't like want to talk to a human for a bit and you want to like read some articles and stuff, that's okay too. Like that's definitely part of your job.
And that's kind of interesting, Pam, like giving energy to other people as the person in a pairing situation who may not be driving. I think a part of your role can be kind of cheering the other person on as you're working through problems together, kind of like feeding that energy loop. And to speak to the kind of issue of siloed domain knowledge that pairing can kind of break down, at DuckDuckGo we have a very, very large application with a very, very, very small team working on it. And so there are some areas that are very siloed. For instance, the way in which we index our Wikipedia search results was the responsibility for one person in the company. And when we recently signed a deal with someone to kind of like feed these to them, we needed to beef up that area of responsibility, and so we brought on someone else to pair on building that new feature. And now there are two people who kind of own that aspect of the search engine, which is a real boon to us.
Right. They call that the truck factor. I've heard somebody else call it the lottery factor. Like how many people in your company can win the lottery before your company just tanks, or then they go away. So that gets right back into like, why is this important for the business? I think that my guess, I can speak for myself, but my guess is that other people have also heard that somebody is leaving, somebody goes to a new job, and everybody looks at each other and says, oh no, we might be screwed, because that magical knowledge that everybody was so relieved that person had, because they're so smart and they could just own it and you didn't have to worry about it, suddenly it went from your least worry to your number one worry. And not just for maybe a deadline or something like that, but for maybe the indexer of one of the most important knowledge bases in the world, if they were to just evaporate or win the lottery. then that could actually go from, say, just a deadline that has to get pushed out to whether or not your company can actually survive such a thing.
So what can some of the downsides of pair programming be?
I think we touched on some of those already. There's certainly, from a personal point of view, an exhaustion factor. It does, like, one of the double-edged sword of it being a super intense thing to where people may not even be comfortable saying they need to take a break to take care of themselves. At the end of the day, it can just be, you might just be completely wiped out emotionally, just mentally in all aspects. So that can be a good thing in that you're like getting the most out of people, but it can also be exhausting for people who may not have the strength or the endurance to do something like that. I want to say that that's one of the main ones, and there's certainly things like personality conflicts. Sometimes you just don't get along with people. Sometimes people would rather argue than kind of stay on task. This is a couple of things that can happen.
Yeah, in my experience, one of the things that can make pair programming stressful is if your company doesn't make intentional time for it, and pairing with someone else becomes sort of a drag on both of your responsibilities when you're trying to get something done together, but the other sort of aspects of your work are pulling you away from each other and what you're trying to work on.
I'm mostly just interested in, Joe, have you figured out how to, when you work with, or just someone you don't like, or you don't click in the right way? I'm generally a really direct person, and that's something, luckily in open source, the solution is don't work with them anymore. There's a million open source projects that need your help. You don't have to help them out. But if you are on a team and it's just something you don't have power over, what do you do?
That's a great question. I want to say it's only really happened a handful of times. Sometimes that has to do with hiring. We have filters, and that's maybe sounds like a little bit of a cop-out, because what if these people are already hired who don't get along? But I think
clients.
Or clients. Clients is a good one. We tend to screen quite a bit, but let's say that doesn't work. I think a thing that I do is I try to gain a lot of empathy for the other person and find other inroads into making a connection for them. And a lot of times that is personal stuff. So when we have a short break or something like that, asking them, where are they from? Do they have any hobbies? Do they have any pets? And just finding a way to get them to smile and laugh, if that's an issue. But just finding a way to connect with them on a more personal front, because we're all people trying to work together, and they may have super strong opinions about some kind of architecture, the way something should be designed or something like that, and they may be very comfortable butting heads with you. But in my experience, sometimes that's easier when they or when the two of you don't have much of a rapport, and if you can build up that rapport in some other way, then I find that helps. I'm not saying that there's always a risk that also I might be wrong. Maybe this person is right, and they really should maybe dictate the direction of something, some aspect where they really are an expert and I'm more of a novice. And so that what I'm kind of rambling, but that gets into swallowing your own ego. Saying maybe we will go down your road and we'll see what happens there. but give me the respect. If that doesn't work out, we'll try my way. And sometimes there are two ways of doing the same thing, and they're either one is just as valid.
Sure.
I'm curious, has there ever been a time when you sort of actually said I can't work with you, or we need to stop and maybe work with other people on this project?
That has happened. I want to say, I'm trying to think. We've always had sort of an outlet in a different direction, so I might not be as direct as you, but we've been able to say go to the people who are running the project, who are sort of in charge of the relationship with our client, say I think we need to make a move here. And usually it's known early that this has happened. There's been a few times where it hasn't happened to me, but I've watched a pair fight and clearly get not just professionally angry but personally angry at each other. And I've had some luck saying, hey, why don't you guys just go for a walk, go for a coffee, just like get out of here, go walk up the street, go to Starbucks or whatever. And they've come back and, you know, like a buddy cop movie or something like that, that's kind of all been better. And there's been times when that hasn't worked. There was a time when I was leading a project, and myself and another person, we didn't get along very well. And I chose to make a decision about a particular direction because I felt like the other person was being too contrarian, and I was wrong. And I was like, oh, and then when it was shown to be wrong did I realize, oh, that's what they meant, how this won't work. And so I had to confront them and say like, hey, I was totally wrong, and I thought I had a great idea. I thought this was going to totally work. I was like, you know what, I was wrong and you were right. Hey, why don't we pair together on your solution and we can work through it together, and you can really show me like how it is, how your solution is going to be the right one. And I was like, buddy cop time, we're going to like cry it out. Instead he's like, hey, can we go out in the hall and talk for a minute? And that was the only time I felt like I was going to get in a fight. Because there was clenched fists and walking towards me, and then like a pull back, and then he walked away, and I was like, oh, I almost just got punched. So my buddy cop thing, totally wrong. So you never really know. Like sometimes you just don't know.
I am really glad to hear you say that like sometimes it doesn't work, because it's definitely like not worked for me sometimes. There's like one of my favorite quotes ever is, when people show you who they are, believe them. And like that is like a life thing. Like I know it's like now we're getting way too feelings on the pairing panel. But like some people are that way, and it's like, and I really appreciate your advice too of like, it's exactly that like when I thought about, oh, what I would say to someone else who asked me this, it's exactly what I would have said. So definitely like try being nice when it doesn't work. If maybe not.
Yeah, so pairing we've sort of touched on how pairing can go not so well sometimes. One way I've experienced that is when there's kind of an imbalance in maybe not power, but in assertiveness or something, and it ends up that one person, there's more of a backseat typing kind of situation, you know. One person's doing a lot of the driving and the other's kind of watching or something like that. What are some other ways in which pairing can go not well, and what can you do about it?
I mean, Joe mentioned like I think defending the pairing time is really like, if you have to spend a lot of energy defending the pairing time, it kind of doubles down on the difficulty of pairing. Like you start worrying about and feeling more pressure about like what does it mean to be productive during a pairing session. Yeah. Which is also, you know, I mean, it's honestly like these are not challenges unique to pairing. This is the challenge of software development of like, you know, explaining to someone that like, yeah, that one thing took 10 minutes, but this other thing took 3 days. That, you know, to people less, you know, familiar with computers and computing, it seems like you're lying to their face, but you are not. So that's definitely being able to defend the pairing. It's really nice when you like. That's why I appreciate having a team that just has a policy. And even like the nice thing about policy is that it's just like the thing that you can point to and say, well, we pair because reasons. Like, you don't even have to get into it. It's just like, this is our policy. And you don't even pair, like, you might, you know, be in this awesome, like, we pair all the time. But, like, it might not be. You might, like, sometimes work a little independently. But, like, you pair, like, every so often. Like, there's not, like, no one's going to kick you out of pairing club, like, if you don't, like, pair all the time. So it's definitely also, like, I like the policy as a way to, as a defense strategy.
Yeah, you're right. If you have to defend it a lot, it takes away energy from pairing. To whom are you defending pairing? Where do you often encounter resistance in pairing?
Managers. Management. Why I divided the project according to people. 2 people working on separate things is better than 2 people working on one thing according to management.
Right.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I'm sure you all have opinions on this.
not sure. The right now my experience in pairing is more sort of self-directed. If you need to be the one who speaks up for yourself if you need pair on something, or if someone comes to you if they want more eyes on their work, or if it's just kind of like fun and you like coding together and this is a big challenge and you both want to work on it together. So I guess the detractors in pairing, it's sort of like it's yourself. It's staying at my company, it's about staying on your critical path. So if it's sort of like, what do I need to get this done? I really want to pair with this person, but I know that they need to be focusing on this thing right now. Yeah, it's kind of vague, but
That's good.
Yeah.
Very good.
I totally recognize that I reap the benefits of working at a place where pairing is not just encouraged, it's required. If you're not pairing, it's like, what's going on over there? Mm-hmm. I hope somebody's went home sick or something. So I don't have as many challenges at my place of employment. And even with our clients, they to work with us, you got to check that checkbox. We will pair, and it's basically not optional. But in reality, sometimes when you get actually people sitting next to you, it's sort of seen as optional. So I often have to defend pairing to a client developer, client managers especially. And sometimes what's interesting is the sort of like the people we actually engage with directly on, say, a client project. Usually everybody there is on board, maybe a little bit critical isn't the right word, but cautious. They want to kind of see how this goes. But then their bosses, that's, I find, the harder sphere, because the people who come to work with us, they've kind of signed on. It's the people outside that sphere are the ones who's like really taking a leap of faith, saying, okay, I'm going to let you go do this like voodoo hippie thing, and you better show results. And they're the ones that when you have a drink at the bar later, they're like, come on, really? I mean, is this a scam? And it's like, well, you just like watch for the results, and you tell me later.
Yes, it's a scam we've been perpetuating for 15 years with Fortune 500 companies. Yeah, no. Yeah, so when you get resistance to it, how do you break down that resistance? How do you educate? That sort of thing. That's a question for everyone.
I'll use my catchphrase. I say kill them with kindness and kill them with results. It's pair programming is weird. It's a weird thing that people, when they observe from the outside, they're just like, what the hell? Seriously? And so my advice is always be inviting, always answer all the questions, always try not to come off as defensive if you can. Like, don't just be like, well, I'm going to clam up and like just say, oh, just watch me, haha. It's like having answers to their questions, talking to them as much as they want to talk, being able to back up your assertions with past experiences, and anytime somebody comes along and asks questions about it, always say like, oh, I'd love to talk about it. Sure, let's talk about it. And all of that, and not rising to the point of anger. And then, of course, what management really wants is blah, 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 do whatever, deliver. It's like, get my stuff out the door. And as long as you do that, I find that either one, they stop caring. They're like, okay, well, whatever, it's working. Like, do your thing. I guess it's working. And then at the best situations, they come over and say, hey, you guys are interested in working with our other team over here? Mm-hmm. But even more powerful than that is other teams coming to you and saying, you guys want to work with us? Mm-hmm. This would be kind of cool. Or, do you guys have any openings on your team? And that's when, like, the cracks start. And you're like, yeah, here we go.
So for me, I think it's about kind of like leveraging almost like a trade with other people, because we're all trying to work on our own priorities. And for instance, I at DuckDuckGo, we're a Perl shop, and my background is JavaScript, so learning Perl, very exciting. And it's very hard. And for me to go to someone else and say, hey, will you pair on this with me? need to build out this thing. I would love your help. It's kind of like, well, the next time you need some front end help, like I will be there for you. So it's kind of like a trade in my case. That's kind of the leverage that I have to get some pairing when I need it, and someone doesn't have time.
Yeah, I definitely think that the trade idea, because that reminds me of, because what I was thinking about was how when you even encounter resistance from developers on the team, and that's my theory. I have a theory that often that's because they don't have much pairing experience in general. Or they've had a bad pairing experience, which is worse. Like they paired with a bully, or like just someone who made them feel like they couldn't do what they wanted to do. Yeah. And that's why I'm also a big fan of things like Code Retreat, and meetups such as Software as Craft, which meets at PromptWorks usually once a month, and which has code katas in the evening, which are like exercises where you pair and stuff and junk and stuff. So I think like also building up positive pairing experiences is really good, so that it's one of those things, like as a manager, your job is also to keep your team happy. If everyone in your team is happier pairing, like you are a bad manager if you don't let them pair. Like you have stopped doing your job and they will quit and leave. Yeah. And hiring is really, really hard. So like that is a business interest. And then of course can't argue with results. And so then the common thing, this, like I've said like 3 things already, but like in large organizations, the sneaky strategy of like, oh, they told you couldn't do it, or they didn't say it explicitly that you couldn't do it, so you do it anyway, and then you tell them afterward, and it's like beautiful, and it's like the best thing ever. And so then you say, oh yeah, by the way, we paired all the way through that. And that's like why it's significantly better. And it's a result that you can then say like, oh yeah, maybe this is a thing to, bring system-wide.
So what does your pairing setup look like when you do pairing?
So I am very like low effort in my pairing setup. I'm very flexible in whatever someone wants to. Honestly, I use Google Hangouts a lot, which I know is like people who pair a lot remotely are like, oh no, they're terrible. But you know what? Especially pairing with someone who doesn't necessarily pair remotely a lot, it is the lowest barrier to entry, of just like, I sent you a link and I'm going to share my screen and now we can see each other's stuff. Like it kind of works like most of the time. And there's definitely like plenty of other tools. So I don't know what you use.
We use Zoom for all of our sort of remote communications. It's similar to Google Hangouts. I guess you pay for it though, so it's a little bit better. You can have like larger groups, but for pairing, it's basically a Zoom, and one of us is going to be sharing our terminal window. So not the entire computer unless you want to, but you share the terminal window, and one of you is driving. Someone can actually be on the other person's machine, so. It's, you see their face, and you can even see your face, which is sometimes nice, kind of like reassuring. You're still there. You're actually in the same space together. But I really liked what you were saying earlier about how it's pairing remotely, I think, is almost easier to focus because it feels as though when I'm not pairing remotely, it's, you're side by side 2 computers has been my experience. And it's sometimes you kind of like lose track if you're not driving, or even you can lose track if you are driving because there's another person there. It's not just you, yourself, and the computer. Pairing remotely, it feels much more focused, even though it might seem strange at first.
You just reminded me that when you asked that question, my immediate thought was remote pairing, but it's not necessarily. So there are also some things to be said about pairing in person, including the background of your computer, or of whatever editor you're using, making sure it's readable, like talking to the person you're pairing with about the font size, about the backlight of the screen to make sure it's bright enough. Like ask them and say, is that big enough? Is that bright enough? Because it's that thing where like people, they might, if they don't know you well, they might be uncomfortable speaking up for themselves, and they're going to just have a terrible experience because they literally couldn't read your screen. And that is like the dumbest reason to have a bad pairing experience when it's so avoidable. Also, in terms of like BYO keyboard situations, like, oh man, when people have like weird remappings on their keys, Like when someone's remapped their control or something and you aren't used to that setup, it's really nice to have your own keyboards. Like being comfortable is a big deal. Because like if you're uncomfortable, then that's just another bump to get over. It's one of those funny things of like remote pairing is like it doesn't come in as often because someone will be typing, someone will be talking. But if you have if you're switching who's using the keyboard, I prefer to have 2 keyboards set up. Also for the reason of like then my friends who have the weird Vim setup can have their weird key bindings. And I love Vim, but some people have weird key bindings.
Yeah, I would definitely say the viewing thing is really important. I remember having to recalibrate my terminal like preferences because I used to have a nice like semi-translucent terminal and like nice colors that were great for me, but sharing my screen like no one could see it. So now I have a much more Spartan layout, and I always like zoom in a few times when I'm working with someone, but it's much better that way.
Yeah, I like all those points. When you're like pairing side by side, earlier it was brought up that to make an inviting space. So tables like this, say, can hold 2 computers or say a laptop and 2 big monitors, a couple keyboards, a couple mice, just making it like, look, there's no barrier to entry here versus say a cube that has the machine in the corner kind of a thing, and there's always that person who's like back here and clearly sort of like elbowing the other people out of the way. And I really like what you said about things like key setups, like key mapping, so make them, we like to say, make them additive but not destructive. But then there's the D word, Dvorak. That can, like there was a day when they didn't, so nowadays they make these Dvorak dongles, so people don't know. You plug your keyboard into that and you plug that in and then you don't mess with the setup, but some people either don't have them or not supported for some particular reason, and that can actually be a real pain. There are ways of switching the keyboard mapping on the fly between one and the other, and it's just a massive pain. I would say that if you do want to have an inviting pairing set up, have one of those Dvorak dongles there, because you never know when one of those people are going to show up.
I'm one of those D people.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
But I always took it on myself to, I was the weird one, so the deviant, so I always had to figure it out for myself so that I wouldn't mess anyone else up.
Serious question. I use Emacs, my coworkers use Vim.
Yeah.
The editor wars and key mapping wars are real. The struggle is real. I always like from my own point of view, I try to look at it as a way to learn something new. And I would hope that like coming in with that, both people having that attitude is good. It's like, you know what? I'll learn some Emacs for a day, and then maybe you learn some Vim for a day, and we can both level each other up. And it's actually a great way. Something we've done before is say, oh, you're into Vim and I'm into Emacs. Let's use Sublime. Let's like figure that out. Do something new.
Whatever.
So being it's again empathy, understanding people have their comfort zones and everything like that, and being willing to be open and giving to the other person, enabling them, and then hopefully you will get some of that back, or you could ask for it back. Karma.
Maybe we just went the lazy way, but we all use Vim, at least for the work that we would be pairing on. So it's kind of, I'm not sure like if that decision was actually made at any point, but just everyone uses Vim.
I think also a low-hanging fruit is whoever's hands are on the keyboard gets to choose the editor. And you can always switch and then they use their editor and where they're most comfortable. It's about that barriers to entry kind of thing of like, I mean, it's funny, when you said Sublime, I thought you were referring to, because I think of Sublime as like, it's but this is also because I've used it in the past. I think it's a very easy editor. Like, it's not so different than like opening up a notepad. Like, there's no, you don't have to remember modes and things like that. Like, it's just like, if you write text, it works, and you don't get into the weird history mode in Vim, and like you don't get stuck. Theoretically, I'm sure there's definitely ways you can. So neutral territory is an interesting idea, but also, I mean, I really think of just like in the same way, it's the same thing I would do if I'm pairing with someone who they're more familiar with language syntax. If it's a new language to me, then they get to be on the keyboard and use their editor, and I get to talk more about the ideas and learn about the syntax as I'm watching them. Helpful? Yeah.
At what point would you transition to you being on the keyboard so that they can coach you through the syntax?
Oh, definitely. So the question is, when would you switch to being on the keyboard? That's a great question, because I've actually explicitly done that and said, like, I know I'm going to be slower, but I need to get my, it's actually like a brain thing too, of getting physical, like your fingers are touching the keys, and so you're actually learning a little bit differently, and it's kind of like doing different synapses. So really just being direct. It might just be like on a first thing, or if it's something like very like foreign to me, then I would want them to go first, and then I might say the next time, or a time after that, after I felt like, I don't know, internally for me it might be like once I feel we've made some progress and I have like, I'm energized to like have a goal, and I'm like, okay, like we talked about time goals, but also like small task goals. Like, we are going to write the function in the test that does this, and then we will take a break. And so and that can also be like writing a very small thing in a very small test in a new syntax can be really helpful to me.
We had another question back there. Yeah.
Yeah, I wondered if you noticed any relationship between the kind of work you're doing and the quality of preparing. So like reading documentation, not good at preparing, but writing tests or solving a really well-defined problem, that's great in my experience.
Yeah, solving really well-defined problems. I think what you said recently with the task-oriented breaks really resonated with me because when you've defined the world that you'll be working in previously, like writing tests, I think can be really great for pairing, because you have clearly defined objectives, and you can identify the gotchas as you go. Whereas if you're kind of doing a more open-ended problem, the gotchas are a bit murkier, and I find that kind of like the level of thinking is more high level and less nitty gritty, and I think it's better when you're pairing to have the nitty gritty level. The pairing can even start before you get to the keys and you're like at a whiteboard. That's when the high level thinking, I think, can be most effective. Documentation, I have never paired on documentation, so I don't know if I can speak to that.
Like reading or writing?
Reading, like doing
reading.
Oh, okay. For doing, I mean, so I think you have an opinion about this, but I might even disagree with you, because I feel like I really enjoy, and this was something that I do as a pair. I don't know, maybe my pairs hate it, but I like when pairs do this of like, if you aren't the person in the editor, that you can be like the ninja researcher in the background, so that like when you're discussing and you get to the point and you say like, well, I already pulled, and we've already got the Stack Overflow for the specific thing pulled up, and like you're doing the background research so that you don't have, so the person driving doesn't have to like switch between doing that, and I feel like that. I really like that as flow, and also it can make the navigator feel a little bit more involved too, I think.
Well, we could go on talking about this for another 40 minutes, I'm sure, but unfortunately we're out of time. We should move on, keep on with our schedule. I know I'll be around during happy hour to keep discussing. I assume Pam won't, but a few others will. So feel free to chat us up and ask us more questions. Also make sure to take a peek at our PromptWorks pair programming setup. Feel free to ask us questions about that as well, tete-a-tete programming and so forth. We've really enjoyed talking with you about pair programming, and I wish we had more time for questions and further discussion. It's a big topic, and I really want to thank our panelists for their expertise and sharing with us this afternoon as well. Thanks.